I'm going to go over what the yips are, how the yips form, and then a few tips that you can use if you're currently struggling right now with the yips. Now, the yips are a psychological phenomenon that manifests itself in the physical inability to make a throw. You might be struggling to make an accurate throw right now. You might be finding yourself completely unable to throw the ball, right? I've worked with catchers who have had a difficult time throwing the ball back to the pitcher overhand, and they just start pumping the ball back to the pitcher. You also might have a difficult time throwing the ball as hard as usual, so maybe you're lobbing the ball back to the pitcher if you are a catcher. If you are a pitcher, maybe you are taking some off your fastball, throwing it to the plate. There are so many different ways that the yips can affect you, but the bottom line is the yips cause you to not be able to make easy throws on a consistent basis. And that right there is one of the defining characteristics of the yips: easy throws. You're not going to find yourself struggling with the yips normally with a difficult throw. A prime example is a catcher who's able to make the throw down to second base when a runner is stealing. They can do this every single time. They make strong throws, they make good throws, their pop time's good. But what happens when they need to throw back to the pitcher? All of a sudden, that's an easy throw, so they end up making a poor throw. I've also worked with a catcher who struggled to make throws to first base because, once again, that was an easy throw. So put simply, there's something mentally happening, which a lot of times happens on a subconscious level, that is affecting your physical throw. And then what's frustrating about this is when you find yourself having a difficult time throwing, you might start tweaking your mechanics because you think it's something physical. But if you can make good throws in certain situations, if you can throw the ball down to second base, if you can make throws from the outfield in, but you can't make good throws in warm-ups, whatever it might be, we know that it's not something physical, it's something mental. And the mental is going to be the yips. So how are the yips formed? Well, the yips in baseball and softball are very closely related to two mental game challenges: sports performance anxiety and the fear of failure. Sports performance anxiety is where you are worried about what's going to happen. So you're going to be worried about making a bad throw. And then the fear of failure is linked to sports performance anxiety because when you are worried about making a bad throw, you'll start being afraid of making a bad throw. As you fear making a bad throw, this fear changes the way you actually throw. So through my experience working with athletes and through research on my own, I've come up with something known as the mental game cycle. And I think this really describes and highlights the process of the yips and how it's formed. So the mental game cycle looks like this. There's a bad throw, then there is embarrassment that follows, then fear, then anxiety, then over-control, then another bad throw. So let's break this down and look at each part of the mental game cycle. So the first part is a bad throw. Now this is pretty self-explanatory, but a lot of times this is what's going to be the trigger for you when it comes to creating this yips cycle or creating this fear of making another bad throw. Most of the athletes I've worked with who have dealt with the yips in baseball and softball can track this back to one moment. It might have been a bad game, it might have been one bad throw, it might have been an injury that then caused a bad throw in warm-ups, whatever it might be, but a lot of times there is a bad throw that starts the yips, right? A bad throw that triggers this feeling of fear when it comes to your throws. Once you have that bad throw, the next part of this cycle is embarrassment. Now, when you make a bad throw, so let's say you're a catcher and you make a bad throw back to the pitcher. One example I remember from a catcher I've worked with said that he threw it into right field, right? So you're supposed to throw it back to the pitcher and you throw it into right field. That's an intensely embarrassing feeling because you're supposed to make this simple throw and you throw it into right field. And that feeling of it being an easy throw is one of the reasons why I think the yips can be so strong, because when something is supposed to be easy and then you struggle with it, it really feels like something's wrong. So then you feel like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I make this easy throw? And so it only worsens that feeling of embarrassment. Once you have that feeling of embarrassment, because you've seen yourself make a bad throw, maybe the bad throw even hurt your team and scored a run, right? Whatever it might be, but you feel that embarrassment. Then what's going to form is fear, especially if you know that the more I make these bad throws, the more that I throw the ball into right field, the more that I throw the ball past the pitcher, throw the ball into the fence, past the first baseman, the more that I make these throwing errors, the more likely it is that I'm going to be pulled from the game. And rightly so, right? Coach can't have me out there if I can't make a throw. So then you start to become afraid of these bad throws. And through my experience, it's really these second two parts, right? The embarrassment and then the fear that that embarrassment causes, where the yips are formed. The yips are not formed by something physical for the most part. Sometimes there is an injury that happens on very rare occasions where that injury is going to lead to kind of an impingement and you have a difficult time throwing. But a lot of times that's easier to overcome because that's more of a physical change that can happen. But when you have this embarrassment and then the fear, so your reaction to the bad throw is one of fear, that's where we really see these yips start to form. So now you have this fear, right? So you're afraid of making a bad throw. You know how negative it is when you make that bad throw, how embarrassing it is. So what's going to happen when you experience that fear? Well, when you have fear, the fear of making a bad throw, naturally this will lead to anxiety. And it's the anxiety that really causes you to make the bad throw again in the moment. So whenever you're anxious out there and you're playing, this anxiety can take many forms. But really this anxiety is all about you thinking what could go wrong, you worrying about what could go wrong, and then your play changing as a result of that. When you feel anxiety when you play, so you're worried about making a bad throw, what do you think is going to be the natural reaction in your mind? Well, one of the natural reactions we see to sports performance anxiety is avoidance. So if you were playing basketball or soccer, this avoidance might take the form of kind of hiding on the field or court, not calling for the ball, not going for steals, going for tackles, whatever it might be, but you hold yourself back. But let's say that you're a catcher. You've got the ball in your hand. You do not have the option to avoid making this throw. So what do? You want to avoid making a bad throw. So naturally you start to take some off of your throw and you try to control your throw. And that's where we see this next part of the mental game cycle take place. Over control. Because you're anxious, because you're so afraid, you're going to try to over control the throw. Because that's going to be the avoidance, right? The avoidance behavior for you when you're throwing, since you have to throw, you've got the ball in your hand, will be to either try to baby the ball. It'll be to try to overthrow, right? So you try to throw too hard to overcompensate. You try to be too accurate, so you try to pinpoint the ball, right? Which as a pitcher, you know that whenever you're trying to be too accurate, you end up not being very accurate, right? And you lose control. So then we see this over control happen where you change the way you naturally throw simply because you are so afraid and so anxious about making a bad throw. Now, if you're a catcher and you try to over control the ball back to the pitcher, this might be where you take some off of it, so you lob it, the ball ends up falling short. Once again, that's embarrassing. Or maybe you try to guide the ball and you end up guiding it too much and you hold on to it too much and you spike it, or you release it too high, right, and it flies over the pitcher's head. Same thing if you're playing in the field or if you are pitching. But when you over control and you change your mechanics and you change the way you throw, naturally you're going to make a bad throw. Now we're back at the beginning of the cycle again. You've made a bad throw, so what's going to follow? Embarrassment's going to follow. This time the embarrassment is even stronger, because as your teammates start to see you struggle and struggle and struggle with making this easy throw, the fear is going to grow worse and worse. The embarrassment's going to grow worse and worse. And the thoughts in your head of, why can't I make such a simple throw, are going to grow worse and worse and worse. So that right there highlights what I have seen to be the main cause and this main cycle that takes place when you're struggling with the yips. There's a bad throw, and then there's embarrassment, and then there's fear of making another bad throw, which leads to anxiety when you're in the moment, which causes you to try to over-control the ball, which leads to another bad throw, and even worse, embarrassment, which cycles back to even more fear for you, and then more anxiety. So when we know this, there are a couple things that we need to recognize. Number one is we need to recognize that the reaction to a bad throw in the first place is the most harmful thing to you as a baseball or softball player. Because when you react negatively to these bad throws, so you feel that embarrassment, you allow yourself to grow afraid, that's where we see the yips form. So it's not so much that right now as you're trying to work through the yips, you want to immediately make a perfect throw. Of course you want to start making good throws, right? But in order for you to make good throws, we have to actually start by changing the way you react to these bad throws. And that's also going to help you in the future, because all of the athletes I've worked with, baseball and softball players who have worked through the yips, the one thing I always tell them is the way that the yips will come back is if you react in a similar way to the way you reacted previously to a bad throw. So you have to make sure you start responding differently to these bad throws. But if we also know that it's the way you respond to the bad throws that is creating this yip cycle in the first place, that also tells us that it's something mental and internal. And if it's something mental and internal, we can work on changing it. So the way that we're going to work on changing it is we're going to focus first on the in the moment over control part. Because subconsciously, with managing your fears, managing your belief, that's something that we can work on over time. And when I'm working one-on-one with a baseball and softball player on the Yips, we do focus on long-term, how can we manage and alter your subconscious beliefs? And we do that through a few different techniques. But in the moment when they're going out there and playing a game, if they're in the season and they have a game this Saturday and it's Thursday, for example, we're not really going to alter their subconscious that fast, but they need a different strategy in place so that they can start making good throws. Because nothing is going to help you manage the Yips better than making good throws. You'll start to feel more confident. The more confident you feel, the less you try to over control, the less fear you feel, the less anxious you are. And so naturally, the easier it will be for you to work out of this cycle. So what we're going to focus on with this strategy is managing your thinking in the moment. Because if we look back to the mental game cycle that I just explained and we focus on the anxiety part, so we focus on the over control. Whenever you are afraid of making a mistake and whenever you are anxious about what might happen, we can see that your attention is in the future. Your attention is focused on the negative. What we want to do is we want to work on bringing this attention back into the present moment. The reason that you're able to make these quick throws, right? The throws down to second, the throws, I was working with a shortstop who was struggling with the Yips, and he was telling me when he makes plays up the middle or backhand plays or slow rollers, he makes great throws. And when I asked him why, he said, because I'm much more athletic. I'm in the moment. I don't have time to think. When you have time to think, that's when you struggle with your throws. And it's because if we think back to that mental game cycle, it's the over control that's hurting your throws. You cannot over control if you're just doing things quickly, right? If the pitcher throws you a ball, you catch it, you see the guy stealing, and you quickly throw the ball down to second base, you don't have time to think. You are just reacting. When you just react, you're completely present. Your body takes over. Your natural instincts take over. You're not trying to over control at that point. If you tried to slow yourself down and over control that ball to second, I guarantee you'd start having struggles throwing the ball down to second, just like the shortstop would have struggles trying to throw the ball to first on a play up the middle if he stopped and thought about it. We've got to get you present. We've got to get you in the moment, in the flow, and to stop overthinking and over controlling these throws. And so with this strategy, it's going to seem super simple. And to be honest with you, this is a strategy that you can apply, you can try, and I've seen success with it. But above anything else, when it comes to the Yips, the thing I've seen the most success with is one-on-one coaching, because the Yips are very personalized in terms of how are you internalizing and thinking about these throws. So if you are interested in learning more about one-on-one coaching for the Yips, I've put a link to learn more in the description below. So the first part of this strategy is you want to find a cue. The reason that I say you want to find a cue is because when you're making these throws, once again, we need to simplify your thinking. We've got to take you from overthinking making this bad throw to being in the present moment and just throwing, right? Just allowing your body to throw the ball, make that easy throw that you know how to do. The idea behind finding a cue is that you want to identify a target that you're going to focus on, and then you want to think of something to tell yourself. So an example is a catcher that I worked with who, once we walked through a visualization exercise, once we started working on his subconscious beliefs, then we identified, okay, what can you do for this next game? And I asked him, what do you want to focus on? He said, I just want to focus on a very small target on the pitcher's chest. And so then I asked him, okay, and how do you want to throw? Like, what's the state that you're in when you make these good throws? He said, I want to think easy throw. Just make it nice and loose. So then what I had him do is I had him visualize making some good throws back to the pitcher. And when he did, he was repeating in his mind, easy throw, and he was focusing on that very small target. So that's what I want you to do for yourself with this finding your cue part. Find a cue in terms of what you want to focus on very specifically with the throw. It might be the pitcher's chest, it might be the glove, it might be focusing on your follow through, whatever that kind of physical cue is going to be. And then think of a mental cue. Easy throw, smooth, relaxed, something like that. And you want to practice that through some visualization, but you also want to practice that when you're in practice and then start applying it in games. Once again, the idea behind this is when you're feeling all this anxiety and you're trying to over control, you are overthinking. Your mind is racing. We've got to simplify your thinking. We simplify your thinking by hijacking your thinking and making sure that you are thinking something that will help you. It would be perfect if we could turn your brain off, right? If we could just silence your brain, put you in the moment, make you react, that would be the perfect solution. But that's not a very realistic solution right now if you're overthinking. So you want to simplify your thinking with a cue. The next part of the strategy is you want to commit. So a lot of times, a key characteristic of the yips is underthrowing. So you're trying to avoid a bad throw, so you try to guide the ball, over control the ball, and you do what a lot of players tell me they do, which is baby the ball, right? So they're trying to just kind of get the ball there, put it in, kind of place it where they want to place it instead of just throwing. So once you know where you want to look, once you have your cue in place, you want to commit to the throw. And this commitment part is so difficult because you're afraid of making a bad throw right now, right? But think about those times when you make good throws. If you're a catcher and you can make good throws down to second base, are you babying the ball to second base, or are you committing to making that throw? On those slow rollers, if you're a shortstop, are you committing or are you babying the ball to first base? You're committing, right? But now on your bad throws right now with the yips, are you committing to every throw, or are you babying the ball and trying to avoid a bad throw? Remember, it's this fear and anxiety that's causing you to try to over control and change the way you throw, which leads to a bad throw. So you need to commit. This is so hard, right? It's a very difficult thing to do. I know that, right? It's uncomfortable. It feels scary. But you already know right now that the way you're throwing, that feels like a quote unquote safe throw, is an ineffective throw. That safe throw is the very thing that's causing you to make bad throws and only worsen this mental game cycle, this yips cycle. So you've got to find that cue for yourself, right? So going back to the example, focus on the simple point in his chest and think easy throw, and then commit. Make the throw. If you make a bad throw, you can handle it well, but you've got to commit. As long as you are taking some off your throw, as long as you're babying the ball, you don't know if it's something physical, because at that point we can only say, hey, you're holding yourself back. You're not letting yourself throw. Commit to it. If you commit, if you're trying to make these good throws, you're trying to make hard throws, you're committing to each one, and you're still making bad throws, then maybe it's something physical, right? Then maybe it's your release point, for example, and you can focus on changing your release point. But you can't focus on that if you're still holding yourself back. So these two very simple tips for the in-the-moment part of this strategy is to find your cue, right? Both your physical cue and then your mental cue, and then you want to make sure that you commit to every throw. Let go of that fear and just commit. Now, the third part of this strategy is where you want to see the good. So it's not likely that you're going to go from struggling with these throws, feeling like you have the yips, to being fully confident and making great throws. I have seen players make the switch that fast, right? In a matter of a week, they went from feeling like they couldn't make the throw to being extremely confident in the throws and making good throws every time, but that's very rare. It's more likely that you're going to start making good throws, then you're going to make a bad throw. Then you're going to have a day where you don't feel good, but then you're going to start making good throws again. It's really important at this point that you see the good. You see the progress you are making. Because as I said earlier with that mental game cycle, it is your response to these bad throws that's worsening the yips, just as it's the response to the bad throw that caused the yips in the first place. So you want to make sure that you are seeing your progress. See the good, right? If you make a bad throw, let it go. Focus on the good throws that you did make that day. Because over time, talking about changing your subconscious beliefs, over time, you're feeding the beliefs that you have about yourself. You're feeding how you see yourself as a thrower. And if you keep telling yourself, why can't I make these good throws? Or why can't I make these easy throws? Why can't I make these easy throws? It's such a simple throw. Why am I struggling with this? This is so embarrassing. What kind of beliefs are you building? Now, you don't want to lie to yourself, but as soon as you start seeing progress, you want to say, I am overcoming the yips. My throws are getting better. I feel like I'm making progress. What that's going to do is it's going to expedite the progress you're making, because you start to give yourself permission to overcome the yips. And I remember this one catcher that I worked with who, we were on a call, and he had been making really good throws for about 2 to 3 weeks up to that point. And I asked him, I said, what really changed? What changed to where now you're not making bad throws, and if you do make a bad throw, you just kind of brush it off? And he told me, he said, I put my foot down and I just told myself I was better. I was making progress and I was over the yips. And that simple change, right? Putting your foot down, it can do wonders, because what that did for him is it freed him up to make strong throws. It freed him up to commit to his throws. It kept him from thinking day in and day out about how he couldn't make these easy throws, and he started giving himself permission to make good throws. The yips are incredibly frustrating, and when you're a baseball and softball player, it can feel like you have lost all your talent. But the talent is still there and the skill is still there because the yips are a mental game phenomenon. And so what you want to do is you want to recognize that it is your own thinking that has caused this to form in the first place. So it's your thinking that can overcome it. So the first thing we want to do is in the moment when you're feeling that anxiety and fear and you are trying to over control the ball, you have to find yourself a cue to simplify your thinking, and then you want to commit to every throw. As scary as it is, you've got to commit. And then along the way, as you're working through this, you want to see the progress that you're making, see the good. And once again, overcoming the yips is very difficult, and I have seen the most success with it within one-on-one coaching. So if you are interested in learning more about one-on-one coaching for the yips, I've put a link to that in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos each week on sports psychology and mental training.